for the opportunity to invite Seattle audiences into present tense exchanges of issues, ideas, and creativity, even when we, don't get to do it in person. Town Hall will continue to produce online content throughout this fall and into the new year, and as circumstances allow, to even host live streams from our building. Meanwhile, if like me, you simply can't spend enough hours logged on Zoom or YouTube, know that many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form under the header Digital Media. Back to tonight's event. Paul will kick things off with a reading before he hands off to Roger. The whole program will run a little shy of an hour before we move over to questions from the audience. Town Hall's Candace Wilkinson-Davis will join at that time, and together they'll take questions from the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. Keep your questions concise. We'll get to as many as we can, and also know that you can view the event both here on Crowdcast or over on our YouTube page if you want to utilize that platform's closed captioning feature. Town Hall adds new events and podcasts literally every day. Upcoming programs include Robert Putnam on the prospects for and potential path to unity in this country. I should mention he's always been the optimistic sort. We'll have a consideration of solitude with Fenton Johnson, a history of hip hop in Seattle featuring Dowdy Abe in conversation with Blue Scholars Geologic, as well as upcoming appearances by Mario Livio, Michael Eric Dyson in conversation with Robin DiAngelo, Andre Gregory, and still more programs in the 2020 Earshot Jazz Festival offered live from our forum space. For more information about all of the above, visit townhallseattle.org. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Arts and culture programming in particular comes courtesy Arts Fund, For Culture, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, and the Windcoat Foundation Northwest. But as most of you watching tonight know, Town Hall is fundamentally a member-supported organization, and I want to sincerely thank all of our members watching tonight. We truly wouldn't be here without your support. As for one last piece of infomercial, it goes without saying that our partner booksellers are feeling the effects of this pandemic as well. Since you will want to go deeper into Roger's latest work, I hope you'll consider purchasing a copy of the book this very night, as in the next 75 minutes, from our partners at Third Place Books. Buy from them now so we can all rest easier knowing they'll be here when we emerge from this plague time. Roger Rosenblatt is the author of 5 New York Times Notable Books of the Year and 3 Times bestsellers. He's also written 7 off-Broadway plays, and his essays for Time Magazine and the PBS NewsHour have won 2 George Polk Awards, a Peabody, and Emmy, among others. In 2015, he won the Kenyon Review Award for Lifetime Literary Achievement. He's also held the Briggs Copeland appointment in the teaching of writing at Harvard. He's presently a distinguished professor of English and writing at SUNY Stony Brook, Southampton. A few of his titles include 2011's Making Toast, a Family Story, Kayak Morning, Reflections on Love, Grief, and Small Boats, released a year later in 2012, and the novel Thomas Murphy, released in 2016. And tonight's featured book is not the only one of his that's been released in 2020. The Story I Am, Mad About the Writing Life, was published just this past April. Born in County Armagh in Ireland in 1951, Paul Muldoon now lives in New York. A former radio and television producer for the BBC in Belfast, he taught at Princeton for 30 years, and he's the author of over a dozen collections of poetry, including Moy Sand and Gravel, published in 2002, for which he won both the 2003 Pulitzer and the International Griffin Poetry Prize, and his collection Horse Latitudes from 2006, which was shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize. His most recent collection, out just last year, is entitled Frolic and Detour. Rosenblatt's newest book, Cold Moon, on life, love, and responsibility, is the topic of tonight's program. In just a moment, we'll welcome Roger Rosenblatt. First, say hello to Paul Muldoon.
Well, hello. What a pleasure to be here, and what a pleasure to share the stage, the evening, with my dear friend Roger Rosenblatt. We're here to celebrate his wonderful new book, Cold Moon, on life, love, and responsibility. But we thought, if you don't mind, that I might read a poem or two. It's nice to play support, as it were, to Roger. And as it happens, that book that we heard mentioned, Frolic and Detour, came out in hardback a year ago, but is published tomorrow, November 3rd, which is election day, I'm told, in paperback. And so I expect people to be rushing out tomorrow to buy it on their way to or from voting. I'm sure you know that the poetry business is often quite a what would one say, a slow business. And indeed, in some quarters, the time, the day or two before the publication of a hardback or indeed a paperback is known as the calm before the calm. So we just have to see what happens tomorrow. I'll read a little poem. It's the first poem from Frolic and Detour. It's called The Great Horse of the World. And it describes actually my earliest memory, pretty much my earliest memory. At least that's what it says in the poem, so I'm sure it's true. The first thing I remember is being stepped on by a horse while it paused to stale, paying me no more heed than it would an upset pail of water or feed, or a comb dragged through the coarse hair of its mane and tail. The great horse of the world stamps and champs at the bit and lays back one ear as I approach from the rear to hitch it to the world coach, mindful of keeping at least one hand on it so it knows I'm still here. So I'll read next, I'll just read, I believe, one short lyric poem before we move on. Might read something later on, who knows. But because we're here for a conversation, and we're here in particular to honor Roger this evening. But I'll read this. I'll read first of all a little, one of my favorite quotes from Walden, Henry David Thoreau. I'm told wrote Walden. And this is the quote, "We do not ride on the railroad. It rides upon us." Did you ever think what those sleepers are that underlie the railroad? Each one is a man, an Irishman, or a Yankee man. The rails are laid on them and they are covered with sand, and the cars run smoothly over them. They're sound sleepers, I assure you. And every few years, a new lot is laid down and run over. So that if some have the pleasure of riding on a rail, others have the misfortune to be ridden upon. A quote I think that might have a particular resonance tonight at this moment in the history of this country. So this is the riders. Some sigh for those 9 bean rows, some the heavenly abode. Some sigh for the binary, some the binary code. Some load a hermaphrodite brig with a cargo of tin. Some ride with Quanah Parker. Some ride against the wind. And those of us who've ridden the white horse in our own expeditionary force now weep that history must run its course. Now weep that history must run its course. Some sigh for the Café d'Alsace, some for telling it slant. Some sigh for brave Ulysses, some Ulysses S. Grant. Some can't believe that you're for rail. I think I've got you sussed. Some ride upon the railroad. For some, it rides on us. And those of us who've ridden the white horse in our own expeditionary force now weep that history must run its course. now weep that history must run its course. Some still sigh for Art Blakey, some sigh for how he rolled, some sigh for Acapulco, some Acapulco gold. Some hold a piercing on their tongue, some a burning coal. Some ride in on a donkey, some ride out on a pole. And those of us who've ridden the white horse in our own expeditionary force now weep that history must run its course. Now weep that history must run its course. So, Roger, congratulations on this wonderful new book. It's such a delight. I love the way it's constructed. Constructed seems to course a term for it. It's essentially, I suppose, would I be right in saying, a collage, a montage, and it functions beautifully, I think. I just love saying this word, so I'm going to say it interstitially, in what happens in the interstices between these sections of the, actually I was about to say poem, because it strikes me actually as being very much a poem. Its method is somehow that of some of the great poems of in the early 20th century in particular. The Wasteland, of course, above all, where the so much was manageable by Eliot in his setting down of a patchwork of episodes and images, and allowing us actually to find our way through it. And it's been a delicious delicious journey, I must say, through Cold Moon on life, love, and responsibility. So I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about it, and then we'll have an opportunity to talk in more depth about it. Roger.
I will. I'm still sort of stalled on the idea of Paul honoring Roger, whereas it's Roger's great honor to be with Paul in any circumstance. So I'll say a word about Mr. Muldoon before I go through the unseemly business of talking about myself. Samuel Johnson coined the term metaphysical poets, and I reread what I remember from graduate school. And those of you who are familiar with it will forgive me for reading it, and those who aren't, who might be interested. Said Johnson, the most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. He's talking about the poets Donne and Cowley and Henry Vaughan and Marvell and George Herbert, all the metaphysical poets. The metaphysical poets being a term that Johnson coined. The most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. Nature and art are ransacked for illustrations, comparisons, and allusions. Their learning instructs, and their subtlety surprises. But the reader commonly thinks his improvement dearly bought, and though he sometimes admires, is seldom pleased. Johnson didn't like the metaphysical poets, or he liked them and admired them, but felt he wasn't moved by them. He would love Muldoon, perhaps not the last of the metaphysical poets, but in the same range as the originals. And by that I mean Paul, can put things together in a stanza or in a whole poem that never was supposed to be there. Sometimes Johnson would say he yoked them together by violence. Sometimes Paul, a musician, yokes them together by violins. That makes no difference. The effect is a wonder. So I'll just read you a few lines of Muldoon. I'll read you more of Muldoon than Muldoon read of Muldoon. In 1940, when W.C. Fields and Mae West rode into Little Bend, passengers were still on the grand tour, and flight attendants wore haute couture and smoked a Turkish blend. You can almost see, I play jazz piano, and you can almost see Muldoon's fingers just move through the words, his mind move through the words, and come across the surprises that the improvising of jazz allows. And he can be funny. He's the only one of the few people I know whose wit can be funny. Usually wit is merely impressive. So he is just as witty as anybody can be, but extremely funny. Christina Rossetti more than once paid homage to Alfred Lord Tennyson, having more than once crossed the bar. We're talking about drinking here. Wit, humor, cleverness, more than cleverness. He can make you laugh, he can make you cry. Here's a poem from another book, from a poem called Pelt. Now rain rattled the roof of my car like holy water on a coffin lid. Holy water and mud landing with a thud. A whole life encapsulated in a very few lines. Frolic and Tour, his new title, or the new paperback title, is perfect. It's Frolic and a Tour of the heart and the mind. Finally, let me give you a tortoise. I don't mean I'll actually give you a tortoise. Let me give you his poem, The Tortoise, or the first lines of it. You'll see what I mean. Again, yoking together things that have never had any business being together, but in the first-rate mind of an imaginative poet, suddenly seem born for one another. Try telling a dramatist the sky's the limit when an eagle has let fall a tortoise on his bare skull. Now Aeschylus will expire without the opportunity to develop his skill in single combat or master basic heroic feats. However emotionally detached, a tortoise had within it to be the sound of a lyre, improvised by my friend Joseph in a last-ditch effort to rise above the gulag. Stunning, takes your breath away. So in my own small way, so do I admire Mr. Muldoon, that I probably imitate him in a way, perhaps not directly, but with the idea that lots of things belong together that you wouldn't think belonged together. I'm sometimes asked, at least on this little book tour of mine, what inspired this book. Nothing inspired it. Writers are inspired by nothing. My wife Ginny and I lived with our grandchildren for 7.5 years after our daughter died. And I used to go to the local public school where the kids went and talk about writing from time to time. And one afternoon, my granddaughter Jessica introduced me to her 4th grade classmates thus: "This is my grandfather Bappo," my grandparental name. "This is my grandfather Bappo. He lives in the basement and does nothing." I could not fault him for accuracy. I don't do anything. We make nothing. King Lear said, "Nothing comes of nothing." For writers, everything comes of nothing. We don't know where this stuff comes from, and suddenly there's a cold moon in the sky, and we learn about the moon. What is that moon? And then I learned that moon augurs the winter solstice, and I thought, well, I'm in the winter solstice of my life. And then I was in a house on the New Jersey shore, and I saw the ocean at night and the moon over the ocean. And then things started to come together little by little, the light on the ocean and the moon. The first night I saw the moon, I thought it was the harvest moon. I know it was out of season, but it was so big and so orange, the bloodshot moon. Anyway, so it begins. So here's a little of Cold Moon. I'm supposed to hold this up so that you buy it. Thank you. Wipe the tears from your face and see the boulevard of light the moon has cast on the black water. See the boulevard as a staircase laid flat for a moment before it takes shape and rises, like the one in the movie Stairway to Heaven, a sort of celestial escalator made of white marble steps moving forever skyward. The story is about a courtroom trial in heaven, a battle for a man's soul, whether he should die young as he was scheduled to do or be allowed to remain on earth and live out a long life. A woman's love for him wins the case. Love wins the case. Wipe the tears from your face. See the moonlight and rise. No need for a stairway. Hold on to your soul. One shot of courage, and we're climbing. Sitting on a beach with my 10-year-old grandson, Sam, I watched his brother, 6-year-old James, balance himself while standing barefoot on the top rail of a high white wooden fence. James does things like that, climbs something, then finds a perch, disregarding any possible danger. Now, dressed in red shorts and a Washington Nationals blue T-shirt. I'm so sorry. He is gazing out to sea. James is gazing out to sea, his little body angled away from Sam and me. It's a wonder how James goes off on his own and takes in what he can, I remarked to Sam. Without turning to me, looking admiringly at his little brother, Sam says matter-of-factly, he loves life. Midnight on December 20th, 2019, nearing the advent of the year of flawless hindsight. A bloodshot orange presents itself without notice on the northern horizon, just above the dark beach and the dark sea. This is the cold moon, also identified as the long night's moon, the last before the winter solstice. My weathered mind flicks to my own winter solstice, the coming of my winter time of life. Through a 3-windowed wall, I watch and brood. The sea rolls out like an old dog into its own black coat. The cold moon, now saffron white, sketches a sporadically spotlit path, recalling the jungle runways I saw in Africa when I was a journalist writing about wars. Dim lights like phosphorescent animals murmur at the far end of the beach. The beach itself, a bench of robed jurists, versed in maritime law. A solitary tern hangs in the air on the word wait. An unseen magistrate asks, who is responsible for this wreck? How still is night, and with every passing year a hardening of the arteries. The bones fray, the skin puckers, the skills ebb. At this age, comrade, at this stage, what is to be done? Should we toss in the towel or gallop across the Anichkov Bridge together in the opposite direction from whence we came and, like the czars, make a palace of winter? I am a book in your lap. Better to know where to go than how to get there. I wander from thought to thought, having learned but 3 things from my long night's moon. I believe in life, I believe in love, I believe we are responsible for each other. Black roses, life. A golden bubble of the sun, a rhetoric of shadows, redeeming snow, life. The click of the lock, the crackpot, the camo kayak, the littered dock and mottled face of the kiosk. Where is the drowned girl? Life. A success of geese, the annals of your eyes, blood on a boxing glove, blood on a tunic. Well, did you ever? What a swell party this is. Life. The departure of kings, down the hatch, down the thatched roof, to the rocks, an Irish on the rocks, or neat or not. Life. An ecstasy of daffodils, a parody of weeds, a comedy of eros. If you're ever in a jam, here I am. If you're ever in a jelly, rub my belly. Life. Where is the drowned girl? The bronze grip of fear, fear of the bronze grip. Playgrounds, coffee grounds, on Stephen's Sunday morning, they've clogged the drain, evidence of rain, ravens explode upward in a black parachute. Life. Flattery of moonlight, redeeming moonlight, and the cold moon acknowledges the glitter of the sea as a day moth folds its wings and sings, good night, ladies, it swings. Moth dreams, rub your angry skin till it's raw, blood on your knuckles, blood on your thighs, cast your aspersions to the winds, your icons, bygones, frantic, pedantic, antic, Atlantic, life, life, life. One afternoon I heard a thud from the kitchen. When I went to look, a dead bird lay on the deck outside the sliding glass door. The glass door had brought about the death of the bird, which must have mistaken it for open air in the blinding sunshine. The bird's body had left an imprint on the glass, vague and lacy like the smoke ring from a cigarette. The imprint was a complete circle except for a small smudge at the top where the bird's head must have hit. The little guy lay on its back on the deck, still as any sun worshiper. I did not recognize the markings, green, orange, and brown like a mallard, but smaller. When I picked it up to put it in a Ziploc bag, the bird felt heavier than I had anticipated. The body had heft and substance. Only when I had tossed it in the trash and returned to the house did I notice the imprint on the glass door. It was there that day and remained through the following morning and a few days after. I would wipe the glass door clean eventually, but not that day. The smoke ring was all that was left of the bird. What will you leave behind, this book and that? What will you leave behind, this gesture, that smile? What will you leave behind, a faint imprint, a feather? What will you leave behind? Would you mind repeating the question? What will you leave behind? I don't know. Love? That's more like it. And so the book goes on to talk about life and love and responsibility in various forms and with various examples. I tried to vary it the way one varies jazz music. The best review I ever got was from Pete Hamill in the New York Times Book Review, when he said, I write like a jazz musician and I only choose to surprise myself. It's absolutely right. I only choose to surprise myself. Sometimes I hope the surprises are pleasant. But I like music. I like playing jazz, and jazz is the art of improvisation, and I improvise the book.
Music is a constant really through it, isn't it? It's you fade in and out so beautifully. Were you going to read a piece that featured a music?
Well, I was just going to read one very short piece, and then I'd love to hear you talk about it, because you're a musician yourself. You play guitar.
Well, after a fashion.
Well, I play piano after a fashion, long after a fashion. But it gives us both pleasure, and it has something to do with the way we write. Anyway, here's this brief thing. Jazzmen like Bill Evans and Miles Davis, as if there could be anyone like them, are masters of the ostinato, the repeated phrase or theme. So practiced are they in this art that 5 levels of ostinatos can be reached and detected at once. The effect is a mystery. You remember hearing something that you hear for the first time. One may try for that effect in writing, too. Life, love, and responsibility. In the ostinatos of these fragments, can you make out the tune? And if you read a book of Paul's, if you read a big book of Paul's, like the most recent one, you can hear the tune throughout. You can pick up sometimes you forget the tune. Sometimes he lets you forget the tune, and then it comes right back to you.
You know, you mentioned the fragments. These fragments I've shored against my ruins, T.S. Eliot, the aforementioned. Good night, ladies, a phrase you used there a few minutes ago, which, of course, I assume is a reference to the Westland, with you know, that wonderful play. As you know, Eliot called it initially, "We Do the Police in Different Voices." That was its original title, or some version of that. But I wanted to ask you about what analogies you would make between the business of writing, Eliot, of course, with the quartets, and music. How, if at all, do they come together for you?
I'll tell you, I haven't the slightest idea.
Mm-hmm.
But I do it, and I know you're right in saying it, and I certainly can hear the tune. I can hear the music in your marvelous poems. Since I play by ear, I make mistakes a lot. And one of the things when you make a mistake when you're playing a piece, any jazz piece, is then you want to make another mistake to cover the first. And then it sounds as if you know what you're doing. And eventually you actually do know what you're doing, making a compendium of mistakes. There's something called, as you know, Paul, a suspended chord, and a sus chord, it's sometimes called. And it's a very simple thing in music. If you have, say, a C major chord, which is a C and an E and a G, and then, C and a E and a G, yes. And then with the G, play an A, but at the same time, and you get a different note entirely. Thelonious Monk did that all the time. He made a lifetime of making of sus chords, notes that don't really exist. So I try to do that in writing as well, the note that does not exist. And what is a sus chord in writing? It's ambiguity. You think you hear something one way, think you hear something the other way. You're actually hearing it both ways.
That image of the mark that the bird leaves on the window is very powerful, I think. Do you think of that as is that an ostinato of some kind? How does that function for you?
Absolutely, and then that's why I create the dialogue immediately afterwards. What would you leave behind? Here's Rosenblatt and Muldoon, we hope we have a few more years and a lot of writing. But you can't help but wondering what's this been about? You know, What have you left behind for the people for whom you care so much? Because whatever they say about writing and writers and the craziness of our life and the selfishness of our life and self-interest, we do it in order to make the world a little better. That's and happier and more beautiful. No matter how corny it sounds, that's exactly why we do it. So what will we leave behind? And I think then of this bird, all he left behind was this faint imprint on the glass. And is that what we leave behind, or do we have something that makes a little more impression?
Well, do you think at all? Do you think at all of what you yourself would leave behind? Is that something that would exercise you in the course of a day at all?
Not so much then, because that sounds too deliberate. But in fact, the whole existence of this book, Life, Love, and Responsibility, is what thinking about it seriously, seeing life. One of the things Paul does so beautifully is to make you see everything. Seeing is so important for a writer. We tell our writing students, if you make the reader see you are halfway there. See and look at something very, very carefully, scrupulously, like a detective. Let no clue go unnoticed. See life. Teach people to see life, and then life is breathtaking, and it will take your breath away long, long, long before any virus will.
I think one of the things that comes across in the book is your great. Well, we have love, love, your love of life, your zest for living, and the capaciousness of your imagination is quite striking. I mean, one may open this almost at random. I see here, page 84. Is it the poems you have lost, or the poems William Empson lost? Whatever happened to William Empson? Not many people have, I suspect, bought, as I did the other day, a second copy of 7 Types of Ambiguity. Never mind one copy of it. I mean, I just even let me just for fun, let's talk about some of these people you mention here. What William Empson? What does he mean to you?
Well, the funny thing is that you go to buy the 7 Types of Ambiguity, his most famous work. That not a poem, the most famous prose work. He was a mathematician.
Yes.
But the wonderful thing is we're so odd. I mean, that we would buy such things. I would and notice them and want them and covet them. And Empson, as you know, wrote a poem called Missing Dates, and it's the things that you waste. What are the things that you waste? What are the things that go away from your life and leave you standing there naked and distraught? What can you possibly not waste in your life? Missing Dates. It is the poems you have lost, he says. It is the poems you have lost. So for oddballs like Muldoon and myself, we would prefer to at least not lose too many poems.
Empson had a quite remarkable career, but it was a career that started very early on, of course. I mean, he wrote 7 Types of Ambiguity when he was, 15 or something, something extremely young anyway. I mean, it's a remarkable book. Then you've got Kurt Weill, Maxwell Anderson, after they wrote September Song. Kurt Weill. You're a fan.
I am. I'm always amazed. I mean, I'm amazed that Kurt Weill and Maxwell Anderson wrote September Song. That was enough for me. You have these 2 major writers of words and music putting together this wonderfully plaintive song, which I remember my father singing and telling me about Walter Euston singing it in Knickerbocker Holiday, the play from which the song came, and how plaintive the song is. And I remember thinking about the song my whole life. I was born in September, so it helped. Now, of course, September Song is my song, and the days dwindle down to a precious few, November, December, and these few precious days I'll spend with you. It's how the book ends, in fact.
Yes. Would you be willing to read that section on that page, actually, page 84, that story? I think one of the most beautiful stories in the book about your cousin who survived Auschwitz on page 84.
I will. I haven't read this in a while, so thank you.
Would you mind?
No, I do not.
It's very moving.
What would you do if I said I really minded?
Well, I would say, of course, well, we'll do something else. But honestly,
Yes, you would.
I find it very moving that
I am grateful.
We
I'm
go.
grateful to you.
We're with William Empson, and then we go to this.
Well, that's you. That's you in a nutshell, or we live in the same nutshell, you and I. I don't know why our minds go where they go, but I'm sort of grateful for the trip. Anyway, here's the cousin. A distant cousin of mine whom I never met survived Auschwitz. He had been a lawyer and legal scholar in Germany before the Nazis seized the country. When the war was over and the extermination camps were liberated, my cousin came here and settled in Brockton, Massachusetts, where he found a job selling shoes in a shoe store. He was by then in his 60s. After a few months, the owner of the store approached my cousin and told him that he would like to promote him to assistant manager. Clearly, my cousin was too well educated and had too distinguished a bearing for a mere sales job. My cousin thanked the owner, but said he would prefer to have no higher position than the one he held. He was content to sell shoes to people who came to the store because they needed shoes.
So that's what is that a person who has the measure of himself in some way, or what's that about? Is it about?
Well, and you bring up it's like you bringing up the Gulag suddenly in those wonderful lines of poems. These things don't leave your mind. I think it's partly somebody who knows himself, and partly who knows his place in the world and has seen a world where the elevation of people can lead to murder. I had a great teacher, and you knew him too, John Keller at Harvard, who said he hated the Romantics. He hated the Romantics. And I said, well, why do you do that? He said, because all Romanticism leads to Dachau. And it's a very interesting way to look at it. You know, it's a narrow way, perhaps, but it's a kind of brilliant way to look at it. Because if you believe you talk to God, and worse, you believe that God talks to you, it's a very short step to the extermination camps.
And I suppose it's one aspect of nationalism, isn't it?
It is connected to absolutely. And here you have Trump. Here you have you knew he was going to come into this. Here you have Trump today or yesterday. There was a whole bunch of Trump supporters in buses stopping the buses of Biden to get to where they were going. In other words, they were impeding them. It's illegal. They were impeding them on the trip. What does the President of the United States call these people who are committing this crime? He calls them patriots.
There's somehow this. I feel that the spirit of Yeats hangs over this book. Am I mistaken in that? I mean, these life, love, responsibility, even the cold moon itself. I mean, there's something very, very Yeatsian about that system of thinking. I mean, Yeats is...
Yes, but I don't have the gyres. I don't have that. I don't have the order.
It's not too well. You'll do a sequel, I hope.
No, I mean, I don't have that orderly in mind, and neither did Yeats. Frankly, what he did was invent after the fact. He used to write. When he wrote Irish Gaelic. When he wrote it, he ever used it in the poems. He would deliberately spell it different ways, and then blame the copy setter, the copy editor, for getting it wrong. Yeats, however, how could Yeats not be in one system in modern poetry and modern writing? How could you not have Yeats in your system?
No, was Yeats someone whom John Keller introduced you to, or had you read Yeats before?
No, I knew nothing of Irish literature or the Irish language before Kelleher, and the reason I knew it was not because of Ireland, which I'm blessed now to love and have lived in and know a little about, but because I admired Kelleher. Kelleher had a stammer, and the stammer kept students away, and the students who were so impatient as to not wait for Kelleher, lost out. Either laziness or something, I stayed for the sentence, and I get the sentence, and then the next sentence, and the next sentence, him wrestling with his tongue. And then there was pure gold, because once you had Kelleher, once you understood Kelleher, then you knew you really were getting the goods. So he could have taught Urdu or Polish literature. It made no difference to me. That he taught Irish literature was my good luck.
Quite brilliant man, absolutely remarkable. Yeah, an extraordinary character. I met him very briefly, as you say, towards the end of his life, but an amazing scholar. You were very lucky to have him.
I was.
So, now, tell us a little bit more about the Midwinter Solstice. Is that something that you thought about at all as before you came to write this book? I mean, were you interested in such matters?
I suppose I was in some of a sideways way. I don't think of myself as old. I probably ought to. I don't know many writers actually who do think of themselves as old. I mean, even when they play at being old men, as Yeats did, I think there's something both self-destructively but rather beautifully childish about most writers. And that one of our childish features is not to allow the winter solstice to take over our minds, because in fact we wonder about the world. We wake up every day wondering about the world. It's a very nice way to almost earn a living.
You know, I was thinking about it earlier today, and about Ireland, in fact, and the remarkable construction which welcomes the midwinter solstice down at that great monument just outside Dublin. And I'm just blanking on the name of it for the moment for some reason, because I'm in the midwinter phase myself. But in any case, this was where it's Newgrange. Newgrange is various names. Noth, Doth. Newgrange is the one I'm thinking about, which is a passage grave where at the time of the solstice, the sun, in the morning sun, enters that chamber. The sun god enters the chamber and mates with, as it were. I hope this is a mature audience, I'm sure, and mates with the earth, right? So
how beautiful that is!
It's absolutely extraordinary. And these, the technology that they had when they built this in Ireland, we're very proud of the fact that Newgrange and a number of other extraordinary monuments were built 5,000 years ago. And we're very happy about the fact that the pyramids were built only 2,500 years ago. 2,500 years ago. So we're very happy about that. But in any case, what I'm getting around to ask you about, rather than blaring on about in a jingoistic fashion about Ireland, is how at this low point, quote unquote, of the year, actually we're looking ahead again.
Always. To
regeneration. And I get the sense that that's a very strong force for you also.
It is. This here is where I talk about responsibility. That we're responsible for each other. And then I look to nature a bit for that. I talk about a mimosa tree where a certain kind of beetle goes out on a branch, buries its eggs in that branch. The branch falls, the eggs obviously become little beetles again. The tree gives birth to the beetles give birth to the tree. Then this remarkable, as parents we know this, this remarkable process in a woman where at conception, the cells of the child and the cells of the mother move across the placenta in a kind of conversation. And the cells of the mother stay with the child as the child is born in all the major organs, heart, lung, and so forth, etc. And then the cells also stay with the mother to fortify the mother for the second or third birth as a kind of act of generosity. Astonishing. Talk about taking your breath away. Astonishing that we were designed this way. Where we are responsible for one another, where organs responsible for organs, people responsible for people. And then I talk about some stories, obviously, where responsibility for people was not shown. But from your example too, The idea that nature could be so designed to cooperate with something a person builds to warm the earth and make the earth golden. You sigh, really.
It is. It's wonderful. Now, where are we? Would you like to read another section at all?
Would you like me to read the end, how the book ends?
Yes, that would be fabulous, because you come back to that image again, as you say.
Yeah.
And September song. Yes.
And I'm on the reader's side. That's the other thing about Muldoon's poem. You never doubt that Muldoon is on your side when you read the poems. He's not lofty. He's not going out of the room. He is not telling you how smart he is, or or even when he is so smart, he is always making sure that you are with him, which is an amazing feat for somebody who is a virtuoso with words. Anyway,
you were too kind. I really appreciate your saying that.
No. I'm just saying the facts. Here's how Cold Moon ends. Last two sections. Come do it while you can. Come help them. They do not call you. They do not know you, but come help anyway. In a shiver of wild flowers, in the seepage of the December ocean, as a cortege of blackbirds passes by, do it. No need to be territorial. Extend the borders of your authority to the ferryman, the nervous Nellies, the tailors, the traders, the birders, the hoi polloi. In a snit, in a rage, in a snowstorm, the sea white as a sheet of paper, make a mad dash for them before the gate slams shut. You still have time. He who hesitates is toast. Those tanks, the machine guns mounted on the tripods, they can't hit the side of a barn. Under the boardwalk, fish slap themselves to death. Pack up your commas and your consonants. Unfortunately, the brass band is on holiday at the Ritz, so you'll have to come unheralded. Don't worry, nothing to it. No preparation necessary. You look fine. Oh, this old thing. And lose the fruit basket. Come as you are. First light. I drift amid the flotsam like bait circling the traps. I paddle on my back playing otter, cracking clamshells with my paws. In a passing gondola, a radio plays on the nodes of the blues. 10,000-year-old bones of a murdered tribe rise up in Kenya and reassemble themselves. We are all repeat offenders. One day I'll go out and douse the flamethrowers, sink the armadas, and play 7-string guitar for school children. One day I'll comb the beach for bottles containing notes from the past. One day I'll die. But not today. Today I play September Song on the piano. Today the wind ruffles the fretted terrain of Mars. The mimosa grows in Brooklyn. The stairway climbs to heaven where love is. The selkies sleep. The eggs hatch. The cells chat. We are life. We are love. And we are responsible for each other. I troll my paw in the water and feel candles. And these few precious days I'll spend with you. These precious days I'll spend with you.
I'm so happy that we were able to spend these precious minutes with you this evening. I wonder, are there any? Is it that time for questions or observations? Has it come round to that time? Do you think, Roger?
It's fine. It's fine with me. I'm always so grateful for questions.
Yeah, well, we do not have any questions coming in yet, but I just want to remind the audience that you can submit a question in the Ask a Question field here. If you're watching on YouTube, we're also happy to take them there as well. I want to thank both of you so much for this time as well. It's been so soothing to listen to both of you. And it just reminds us that there's so much more beyond us and beyond any anxieties that we have about this time in our lives and in the life of our country. And I wonder if both of you could talk a little bit. It seems like a theme, in both of your writing, maybe in all writing. This is a theme, perhaps. I wonder when you both started sort of concerning yourselves, I guess, with legacy or with what will be left behind, what the importance of what we do in our lives is.
Yeah, well, I was asking Roger about that earlier. I mean, um, I suppose in moments of, what would one say, some kind of self-regard, I suppose, over the years, I certainly have thought about that in perhaps um, unguarded moments, or perhaps I'm being unguarded even in referring to it. Um, because for most of my life, which is now I'm coming up on 70, um, for most of my life, there was a sense that there was indeed a future, and that I fear has is somewhat um, modified.
Mm.
And you know, at the moments at which I would even contemplate whether or not anyone would read my poems in 100 years' time, as I say, in moments of self-regard and weakness, when I would consider that, I actually think, you know what? I think people will have other things to think about in 100 years' time. Like, how are we going to get through this? You know? And reading poems, I mean, obviously, one would love to think people will still be reading and writing poems. Um, but whether or not one can decently have any expectations in that regard, I think, for me now, I'm afraid the answer is no. I don't really see anybody reading them at all, actually.
Well, I think you're full of it, actually.
No,
Uh,
no, honestly, I
no,
think
no, I don't mean that you don't think it. I think you're in error that they won't read them. I think that
well,
they will outlast your modesty.
yeah.
Uh, I
We had a friend in Ireland, a great Belfast poet. I don't know if you would ever have met him, Roger, on your visits to Ireland. John Hewitt, his name was, and he's often mentioned by those of us who are still around. Michael Longley, a Belfast poet, great poet, often refers to this comment by John Hewitt, which was, if you go into the poetry business, it's nobody's fault but your own. And, you know, that's something that's a line that I think of much more often than any of the other stuff. It's nobody's fault. You can't have any expectations at all. It's a mistake to expect anything, because you're almost certainly going to be disappointed. Now, the other side, then I think, well, really, that is so negative. And you know, Roger is, I suppose, I mean, positivity is really one of the subtext, I suppose. It's not too far down there in your book, isn't it? About having a positive attitude.
I think generally it's true. Sometimes it's unmerited, but I suppose it's the way we were just put together. Here's a poem that you know, Paul, I'm sure, but I wonder if many people do, called Wet Evening in April by Patrick Kavanagh. And it goes to this question of posterity. The birds sang in the wet trees, and I listened to them. It was 100 years from now, and I was dead, and someone else was listening to them. But I was glad I had recorded for him the melancholy. And I think Muldoon can say that as well, whether he thinks it's going to last or not.
Was Kavanagh a poet whom you read?
I'm crazy nuts about Kavanagh.
Yes.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And I loved his life, and I loved his attitude. I loved everything that I knew about him. You know, it's funny. We talk about what one leaves behind. When our daughter died, she was a pediatrician. She was only 38. She died of an anomalous heart condition. Nobody saw it coming, leaving 3 small children. And we had to do something hasty, putting a funeral together and all the things while our hearts were broken. And of course, we were on our knees. But when you're knocked to your knees, you just have 2 choices. You can stay there or you get up. So we got up. And one of the things at the funeral of the people we met, her friends, we had known some, but not all her friends. Mm-hmm. I could see a life. I could see my daughter's life, and I could see how she was respected by her colleagues, and her patients loved her. and all of these things of a professional life and a mother's life, etc., that I only glimpsed of, casually glimpsed, thinking that my daughter would live forever, of course. But I realized then, seeing this and seeing that that's what one leaves behind too. Who is the poet who says we leave love behind? Love is the thing we leave behind. I forget. And at any rate,
what will survive of us is
yes,
love. Is that?
yes.
That's
What is
Philip Larkin?
Larkin?
Yeah.
What will survive of us is love.
Yeah.
I'll take that. I'll take that as a legacy.
Yes. Well, indeed. I'm so glad you're a fan of Kavanagh. I'm actually meant to be doing a new little selection of Kavanagh one of these days, and he's a quite brilliant poet. Candace, did you want to, any thoughts at all there? Any questions coming in? Or have we answered all the questions?
Yeah.
Roger, you've answered, there are no questions.
There's a couple coming in. First, Nancy just has a comment that I think probably a lot of people are feeling. Thank you for ideas that give me the strength to get through the hysteria of the next few days. So we're thankful as well. Let's see. Kim has a question. What do you see as the role of poetry in these current times?
We should let the poet answer that.
Well, no, Roger, as I was I think I was said earlier on, I think this Cold Moon, I think, is a poem. I think it's a long poem. That's how I've come to think of it now. And so, poetry comes in so many guises, and it certainly comes in the form of Cold Moon. Sorry, Candace, please forgive me. What was poetry, what?
What's the role of poetry in these current times?
Oh, I think saving the world.
That's just right. That's
right?
Just right.
I mean,
it's minimizing it, but it's just right.
It's so fascinating to me. Poetry, of course, is a way of making sense of the world. It certainly is that. It's a way of finding patterns in the world. Roger was talking about patterns earlier on, what happens when things come together. And usually when, as in that Johnson's phrase about the metaphysicals, when ideas are yoked by violence together, when similes are made, when metaphors are made, when unexpected things happen, and we have a moment of clarity in what might otherwise be, the thicket which surrounds us, a clearing in the forest of the world. But what I find fascinating, so I do believe it has that function and it has that capacity. But what I find fascinating actually is this question that we've just had. For the most part, we don't turn to poetry to the extent that we might. It's not part of our lives in the way it could or should be. And then every so often we think to ourselves, my heavens, we have a national crisis. What can poetry do here? We tend not to ask, what may the novelist do here? What may the filmmaker, what may the sculptor do here? But we do tend to ask what the poet may do. And I'm fascinated by that. On one hand, I want to say, would you give us a break? Why pay so little attention to poetry most of the time and then ask us to do that? Unfortunately, the people we need at the moment are the elected officials who are able to help us through this kind of crisis that faces us, and to do so in a responsible way. Those are the people we need right now. The people, the doctors, the frontline workers, the nurses. Those are the people whom we need, actually. It's not to say that poets are not going to help us make sense of it along the way. I'm sure they will. But sorry, Roger, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm blaring.
Not a bit, because you just, what you said was proved on my pulses a couple of months ago. I dislocated my shoulder doing another one in essential activities, seeing if a basketball was inflated. And I tripped and I busted my shoulder. So they took me to the local hospital, and my wife could not go with me, could not go in the hospital with me, because it's a hospital treating COVID patients, life and death business. And I'm lying there with this bum shoulder just because of the basketball nonsense. At any rate, several nurses, their assistants, a very good doctor, gave me all the attention that they would have given somebody who was actually had something serious. They set my shoulder in, they pushed the shoulder back, and they put me under. And then when I came out of it, came out from the anesthetic, I said, I hope you people realize how you are appreciated now, and how much the world realizes it's blessed with your intelligence and your effort and your tirelessness. And they said with a slight smile, yes, we do realize it. But they also, in a sense, implied at last it would take such a situation to make the world alert to the absolute indispensability of these people. On the other hand, and Paul knows this old story too, poetry does give the music of life. In ancient Ireland, when one king fought another, and when was not one king fighting another in ancient Ireland, the instructions went to his soldiers, and they said, kill everybody in the enemy camp except the music. And the music was the name for the poet. Do not kill the poet. Kill everybody in the camp, including the opposing king, but not the music. Why? Because he was the music.
Well, they had a notion of the future, I suppose. They knew they were going to need someone for that. Yes. So, please forgive me. I don't mean to be disrespectful of the role of the poet. Absolutely not. And at the end of the day, I think the poets will tell us a lot about this time.
Even if we don't understand it, and we don't. Most of life.
I mean,
yes,
surely.
Exactly. This is the point. Art gives shape to irresolution. It is not. We don't give answers. None of us. Paul doesn't know any answers. I don't know any answers. That we try to make the questions as attractive as we can, or as interesting as we can. But the whole purpose of art is to give shape to irresolution, to give something there that you can hold and say, these are the problems, this is the turmoil that we understand. That's why I was interested in the sea. That's why I kept watching the moon on the sea, because the sea is a body of irresolution. Mm-hmm. Nothing is ever solved. It doesn't take any position on anything.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. If you feel we've covered what you wanted to share with us. There is a comment here from Christine I just want to share with you, Roger. She says that she's a graduate student of SUNY Stony Brook long ago, and while there, an English major for a short period of time, because she was smitten with poetry, and says that she may have stayed in that major had she ever had you as a professor. So just
I'm sure she's doing something very worthwhile now.
Well, SUNY Stony Brook is a fabulous institution. It's absolutely brilliant. I love it.
It's had one Muldoon there several times, much to its good luck.
I've had the honor of being there once or twice. And Roger, what an honor it is to be with you this evening. And thank you so much for talking to us and sharing your insights into the workings of the world, and for sharing your fabulous spirit with us this evening.
Back at you, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to thank the audience for watching and tuning in as well. I encourage you to purchase Roger's book with the link here on the live stream page. That's going to take you right over to our Partners Booksellers website. You can purchase the book there and celebrate local stores. Thank you both again so much. I think that this will be a great event to come back to when we're feeling anxious in the coming weeks. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Candace. You made it a pleasure for both of us.
Candace, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming out or staying in or whatever it is you did. Thank you.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Bye. Bye, guys.